I still don't know how to start the interviews because we've already been talking and it's the same every time. But now it's the actual podcast. So I guess I'll say for everyone listening, welcome Helena Nista. Did I say it right? It's Helena Nista, isn't it?
That's correct, yes.
Because for ages I was reading it just from your Instagram as Helen Nista, like
Oh,
separate that way.
wow. Okay,
But
no, it's
never mind, we
Helena.
got it. I got it. So
Helena
for everyone
Nista, yeah.
listening, welcome Helena Nista to the podcast. So in case anybody missed it in the introduction somehow, you are a sex therapist.
Yes.
How long have you been doing that for?
For about 6 years now.
6 years.
Six
Okay, and
years, yeah.
you mainly focus around like Tantra and stuff?
Yes. So I
Yeah.
actually started with Tantra. That was my first passion and love that I felt, for the field was the passion for Tantra. And I became a
Uh-huh.
Tantra practitioner first, and I was teaching it first. But a lot of people were coming to me with like different sexual issues. So I wanted to expand my knowledge. So I wasn't just using Tantra as a tool. So then I became a sexologist and an embodied counselor as well. So I bring different tools to the field. But basically what I do is I'm a sex therapist and I help
Mhm.
people have great sex.
Okay. So if that hasn't got people hooked in, I don't know what will get people hooked into a podcast. Okay, so like the first thing I wanted to ask actually was basically how did you get into, well, Tantra was the first thing. So
Yeah.
like how did you get into that and then decide to become a therapist?
Mm. It was a personal crisis, really. It was a really big personal crisis that came about because I had been so suppressed sexually myself, and I desperately needed a sex therapist myself, even though I didn't know
Okay.
it back then. Like, I really struggled with my sexuality. I grew up Catholic. I grew up with a lot of shame and I guess guilt around my sexuality, my body, my pleasure, my genitalia, etc. And that basically led me to having very mediocre sex life with my early
Hmm.
partners, that then ended up with me having to go to the emergency room because about 6 years ago I had an experience where my partner was making love to me and it was so painful I actually needed to be taken to the emergency room. So that was the point when I realized I need to do something. I need to change things. I can't just keep going with
Yeah.
having this kind of mediocre, painful sex.
Uh-huh.
And that's because I just couldn't risk having to go to the emergency room again because of sex. So that's when I kind of started to look into my tantric and sexual education. And when I discovered Tantra, I completely fell in love with it. I thought it
Yeah.
just provided me with so many answers and so much amazing information about how to actually take sex to the next level, how to make it more pleasurable, more connected, more intimate, more sacred, more amazing. And that kind of just went from there, because when I started to create these amazingly ecstatic experiences for myself, I
Yeah.
wanted to share that with the world. I wanted to teach others how to do the same thing for them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And like that bit you said at the end there is similar to how I ended up becoming a personal trainer because I got into a gym, helped myself feel better, and then helped some friends feel better, and then wanted to do that for everyone, which is
Yes.
how we've eventually ended up here. Um, but for anyone listening, obviously you said you sort of discovered Tantra and that just changed everything. For anyone
Mm.
who's listening who maybe has that idea of what they think Tantra is, how would you explain it? Like, what is it really?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because a lot of people don't really know and have a bit of or have an incorrect idea about what it is. Tantra is really a philosophy that comes from ancient India. It's a way of being. It's not just about sex. Like we think in the modern world, we associate Tantra with sex, but
Hmm.
that's not exactly correct. It's a philosophy that embraces every single aspect of life as sacred, as special, as beautiful. And what that means is that we bring a lot of mindfulness, a lot of presence
Yeah, that's what I was
into
just thinking of as you were saying that. Yeah. Carry on.
yeah,
Sorry.
into
Mindfulness is everywhere, and it just sounded a lot like that. So carry on. Sorry.
yeah. Yeah. So it's about bringing this kind of quality of living into everyday aspects of life, whether that's having a cup of coffee or talking to someone or going for a walk or making love or anything else. And we in the modern Western world kind of get a bit hung up on the sexual aspect of Tantra because it is such a healing approach to our sexuality, in a way that all the sort of systems or religions that we have been subscribed to, they kind of treat sex as something dirty, something inappropriate, and kind of push sex out of the picture. Whereas Tantra embraces sex as this is just one of those aspects, natural, healthy aspects of life. Yeah. And you have as a human being, you have a full right to explore that and treat that with with pleasure, with enjoyment, with reverence, as something beautiful and special. So I guess that's what Tantra is, and then that's why I use so much Tantra when I work with sexuality, because it really helps to counteract the repression, shame, or guilt, or awkwardness that we experience around our eroticism and our sexual pleasure.
Yeah, it's a really weird thing, isn't it? How basically everyone loves sex, and that's just the way it is. Everyone loves it, but there's so much like you say, shame around it, and like you got like Ann Summers shops like that are just on the high street, and it's all about sex, and it's obviously totally okay, but then people still get weird about it, and it's like, oh no, can't talk about that, or like, oh no, that's embarrassing, or it's you shouldn't talk about it, which is really strange because everybody does it and everybody likes doing it, so it just doesn't make sense.
It does make sense when you consider hundreds of years of conditioning and repression around sexuality that we have been subjected to through the society, the government, the media, etc. And my take on it is that people are easier to control when they are repressed sexually, as opposed to people who are fully enjoying themselves, their bodies, and when people have hang-ups like that around their bodies, their genitals, their sexuality, it's much easier to control them. It's much easier to sell to them, so to market to them things that give them the appearance of that kind of sexual freedom, like a sexy car, or a spray of perfume that will make you, much more sexy or appealing to others. So, the repression comes from an unhealthy place, unfortunately, but we've been subjected to it for such a long time. Even like Victorian era was all about telling you how inappropriate your body is. So when you look at it from that perspective, you start to understand why we have so many hang-ups around sex and why it's so difficult for us to talk about it or to actually embrace it as something amazingly beautiful, healthy, or even sacred.
Yeah. What you said about like the marketing, like if you feel repressed, it's easy to market things to you. The thing that sprang to my mind, which I think I saw, it might be in Russell Brandon, like one of his stand-up things, talks about that, about like female sexual energy and how we can use that to sell things, mainly chocolate. It's like if you watch any kind of chocolate adverts, it's all about like, it's obviously always a woman, especially Galaxy, for example, and it's all like this really like sensual, like wavy curtains, and basically the advert is saying if you eat this chocolate, you'll feel like you're having an orgasm. That's basically the advert, and it's so weird. like you say, like that's how you can sell it.
Actually, for a woman, having chocolate is kind of like it's almost like a close experience to having an orgasmic experience. And I don't know exactly why it's different for women than for men. Men usually don't experience that kind of reward from having chocolate, but there's funny that you mentioned chocolate.
yeah.
Because for a woman it can be almost an orgasmic experience to have chocolate, which is why many women can get almost addicted to chocolate, especially if their sex lives are not quite as flourishing and delicious and yummy as they could be.
Okay, so like a lot of people online, I see them asking all the time, like, I'm addicted to chocolate. What's the problem? How can I deal with it? So from now on, I should maybe just say, how's your sex? Start there, and then maybe work it out from that point.
I
that'd be actually
love
really
it.
interesting to ask. Something just came to my mind there. While we're on the subject where you mention it about like chocolate can be quite orgasmic for women, you, I've noticed in a lot of your Instagram posts talk about like the orgasmic sensations from a lot of things that aren't traditional, if you like, sex. And so, like for people listening who are thinking, how do you have any kind of orgasm without sex? What does that mean?
I believe that our bodies are naturally ecstatic. I believe that the way our nervous system is built, we have a very deep ability to experience blissful pleasure naturally, even without being touched in any way. That has been, again, sort of repressed and disconnected within us because we don't live in a culture that encourages, free enjoyment of the body and of the physical pleasure. But when we start to realize that, and when we start to get out of the head and get more into the body, when we start to cultivate that kind of deep sensitivity in the body, we start to cultivate a deep connection with our sensuality and our pleasure, we start to actually experience a lot of new sensations, a lot of like deeper sensations, and our pleasure gains new layers, new depth to it, and it can come from a variety of things, not just the intense genital and ungenital kind of friction.
Right.
Like we can have sex in any body part. We can have full body orgasms. We can have have pleasure coming from all sorts of different touch, or even like breathing. We can actually breathe ourselves to orgasm. So
Okay.
when we start to realize that we are actually naturally ecstatic, and that orgasmic energy is something we can freely move in our bodies, when we start to embrace it, then that's a game changer when it comes to our sex lives and our pleasure.
Yeah. So are those kinds of things like exercises you would do with your, I don't know if you call them clients, patients, with being a therapist, I don't know.
Clients.
Yeah, clients. So is it sort of like types of meditation that you do with them and like teach them in terms of that type of thing? Like we mentioned mindfulness before. So is it that kind of things you would do in your sessions to teach them how to reconnect with themselves?
There is actually a very specific kind of exercise that, there's many different ways to cultivate that kind of sensitivity, but there's one which is very powerful and very simple at the same time. And it's actually a kind of a meditation, but it's an embodied meditation. So it's not the kind of meditation where you kind of just lose yourself in your breath. It's more of a meditation where you sit down and you come into that kind of relaxed meditative state, but you start to place a lot of awareness in different parts of your body. And it's almost like you're scanning your entire body for sensations. Because when you place your awareness, that's where your energy flows. And when you start to put a lot of attention into particular different parts of your body, you literally start to rewire your nervous system. Because where your attention goes, that's where your energy flows, that's where the sensations start to awaken, and your awareness literally wakes up those nerve endings and those sensations in different parts of your body. So that's like the easiest exercise, and the most common I actually use with my clients, is literally sitting down comfortably, closing the eyes and breathing deeply, and placing attention in different parts of the body, and like feeling what can I feel in my fingertips, what can I feel in the palms of my hands, in my arms, my shoulders. Doing that daily will resensitize the body and will create a deeper level of sensuality and pleasure. Yeah.
Something you mentioned earlier, you mentioned that you were brought up Catholic, and something that was on your website that I wanted to ask about anyway is all about the upbringing and conditioning that we all have. And obviously that's where a lot of our repression comes from, and we need to kind of undo that to make any kind of progress. So what are the kind of, what tends to come up in people's upbringing or conditioning that holds them back from having great sex?
regardless of whether it's Catholic or any other religion, major religion, what comes up is, it's a lot of inhibitions around sex. And that really stops our pleasure and our ability to enjoy our sexuality, because if we are holding all this shame and guilt around our bodies, our nudity and genitals, it's really difficult to give yourself fully into your orgasmic or sexual experience. And one of the big secrets to having great sex is your ability to fully immerse yourself in the experience. That's why this mindfulness, this presence that Tantra brings is so healing and so beautiful. But when we're stuck in the head, because there's all these thoughts about, oh, is this appropriate, or should I be, am I bad, or is there, all these kind of negative feelings come up for us, like shame or guilt or, embarrassment or awkwardness of the whole, okay, we're sexual now and I'm meant to embrace it, but I'm struggling with it. So inhibitions are definitely a huge block that our upbringing creates for a lot of people. It's very common.
Yeah. And how do people start to get over those inhibitions? If they're drilled in there and they're thinking to themselves, is this right? Is this wrong? Am I bad for doing this? How do people start to get past that?
Well, the first huge step is actually start to questioning those inhibitions or those thoughts and ideas. When we never question how we feel about our sexuality, and there's no way we can shift that. But when we start to kind of put a finger on it and go, okay, this shame I experience about my partner seeing me naked, or this shame I experience about touching my own genitals, or this shame I experience about, or this, any kind of block I experience about giving myself fully and immersing myself fully in my orgasmic experience. Where's that coming from? And is that really justified? And is it serving me, or can I change my approach and attitude towards my sexual pleasure so that I can start shifting my experience of it? It's like that you need to first recognize that what you are actually experiencing. And when you put a finger on it and when you name it and when you understand this is not natural, it's not natural for me to feel fear, shame or whatever about my sexuality. It's just social conditioning. It's just the ideas that I got from the media, from my parents, because maybe of their awkwardness about talking to me about sex, and from my teachers, from the peers, or whoever gave me those ideas. Are they actually valid? Are they, should I hold on to them, and are they serving me? And if the answer is no, I shouldn't be holding on to them, they're not serving me, then how can I change my mindset? How can I start seeing my body as beautiful? How can I start seeing my pleasure as precious? How can I start seeing my sexuality as a gift? And that shift of perception and that shift of our understanding around our eroticism, that's what starts the journey of reclaiming sex as a healthy, normal, and natural, or even beautiful aspect of our lives.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And what you talked about there, the idea of questioning your ideas and are they actually true, reminds me of a book, I don't know if you've read it, by Katie Byron, called Loving What Is.
Oh, okay.
Have you heard it?
I haven't read that. No, I know her work, but I haven't read that particular book.
Yeah. And that's basically like what you said there in regards to inhibitions about sex is basically the same for everything. It's basically you believe this, but is that belief serving you, like you said? And if it's not, change it, do something different.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And it's really simple what you said there, just think about it. Is this useful? No. What can I do instead?
Exactly.
Yeah,
at some cases it can go deeper than that. There can be sort of deeper, I guess, maybe trauma around our sexuality, in which case I would recommend seeing a therapist and working with a professional. Yeah. But for most people, all that is required is this shift and change of perspective.
Yeah. And what we were talking about there in terms of having those inhibitions and those ideas and thinking about things too much, I had a little look through your website again just before we started, And you've got a bit like targeted to men, like, are you thinking about this or worrying about this? And then a bit about women, are you worrying about these things? And I noticed that 2 parts on each one were kind of the same thing. So for men, it was, are you like difficulties in terms of like premature ejaculation or delayed or low libido, blah blah blah. And then women was difficulties as in pain or discomfort, which you mentioned like you had for yourself before. And then again, it's like low libido, inhibitions, things like that. But then there was two that were different in the examples you gave, and I'm just reading them now. One of them was for men, specifically around porn addiction, and the one more specific to women was getting stuck in your head during sex. So is getting stuck in your head and having those inhibitions and thinking about things something you found does apply more to women?
Not really. Men complain of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And think about the things that people bring into my sessions. Mainly they do focus around the experience of sex. So for men it is usually the struggle with performance, either premature ejaculation or erectile difficulty. For women it is more about pain or discomfort during sex, inability to orgasm, that kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also other things people bring into my sessions. And getting stuck in the head, that's something that we all share, because we are, as society, we live in our heads. Like, we are what therapists call a neck up society, because we
Okay.
spend so much in our heads. From the first thing, in the first thing we do in the morning is, check our phones, we get up, we might put the news on, we jump in the car or on the, train station, go to work, spend our days looking at computer screens, and then we go home and again look at the computer, or or talk to others. But it's like our lives are head based. We're
Uh-huh.
thinking, we're talking, we're worrying, we're planning, we're analyzing. There's not a lot of attention given the body in terms of actually being in the body, feeling the body, experiencing it. So that's what, again, conditions us and our nervous system to get stuck in the head. When you're spending a lot of time in the head, thinking, worrying, etc., that's what's going to come easily to you. And this connection with the body is going to get neglected.
And is that neglecting, that losing that connection to the body, is that where those things like erectile difficulty and pain for women during sex, that's where that comes from?
Mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, it's not the whole story, but
Yeah.
for most of my clients, I can fix their issues by simply teaching them how to feel their bodies. And
Okay.
it's such a simple thing. It's like almost like I couldn't believe it when I got into the field of sexology, that this is what trips people up so much. They are disconnected from their bodies, and that's where so many sexual issues come from. So that's usually where I start. I teach my clients how to actually feel their bodies, how to
Yeah.
create and cultivate a deep, embodied, sensual connection with the body. And then most of sexual problems go away.
Yeah. It
It's
sounds like
it
we just
literally,
keep coming
yeah,
back to that.
yeah.
Just reconnecting with things that have, like you say, because of the kind of society we live in, we're all up here in the head. You don't think about or feel everything else.
That's
And
right.
again, like in more of the stuff that I do in terms of like weight loss and stuff, where we talk about, there's this thing people talk about now of intuitive eating, and that's being able to feel like your hunger signals and things like that and work from that. But again, most people can't do that because they don't know how to feel the signals. And obviously in sex, it's the same. You're feeling things and responding to them, but like in real time to make those feelings even better. And so
Yeah.
it's just all the same, basically. Um,
Absolutely, yeah.
the other thing then, which is obviously more specific to men, probably, which I mentioned before, is the thing all around porn addiction. So is that something that it's mostly men come in with a problem of? And like, what kind of problems does that cause?
So porn in itself, I porn in itself is not a bad thing. So I want to start with that. That I'm not condemning porn. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Porn is a tool. We can all use it. and it can bring a lot of excitement and pleasure or entertainment, or or like that maybe spark to to couples that struggle with excitement or libido in the bedroom. So it can be a good thing. However, a lot of men tend to abuse porn, and that's what leads to issues and problems. And I think one of the biggest problems that men who use porn a lot bring to my sessions is premature ejaculation, or actually even more erectile difficulty. And that's a worrying one, because men as early as in their 30s come to me with erectile difficulty, which is not, or has never really been, a problem of younger men. It's more what sort of naturally happens later in life. But when I have a 30-year-old man sitting in front of me who is struggling to get an erection, that's usually because he desensitized his body so much through and frequent use of porn. Because what happens when we watch porn is, first of all, we disconnect from the body, because so much of the attention is placed on the computer screen. So we're not really feeling our bodies fully, because the attention, or so much of our energy, is sent into the computer screen. So that's the first thing with the way that we disconnect. The second thing is that porn provides us with intense variety of of bodies, of genitals, of scenarios we can watch. So we start to get our nervous system used to this very intense sexual stimulation that comes through the computer screen. And then when we go to the bedroom with a actual human being, this one human being is just simply unable to recreate the level of excitement that all these like intense flashing images coming from the computer screen have given you. Like a man can actually literally see hundreds of naked bodies and boobs and genitals within a space of a few hours. And then so the body starts getting used to this level of stimulation, and then being in the bedroom with one partner who's probably not gonna do anything as crazy as porn shows us. That's where the issues start, because then these men struggle to actually get an erection or stay erect for as long as they would want to.
Yeah, and are you finding, like you said, obviously that kind of difficulty is usually older men, but it's like guys around the 30s now. And have you found that getting younger and younger? I mean, you say you've been doing this for 6 years, so maybe not a lot of time to kind of compare that, but do you think that is something that, if people continue down that path of watching more and more porn more often, would get even lower and lower with men having those issues?
Potentially, because younger and younger men are watching porn now. It's like that, not just teenage, like that's kind of normal that teenagers watch porn, but like kids start to get access to porn, and that's worrying, just because they just they don't have the capability to obviously watch porn in a sensible and mature way. And and that's what I'm saying when I'm saying I don't condemn porn as such, because when you have the ability and the maturity to watch porn in a way that will serve you, then there's no problem. But kids, or often teenagers, don't have that ability to discern how to actually use porn. Hence, that is starting to affect their bodies, their experience, and down the track, their ability to enjoy themselves sexually. So yeah, quite potentially this could lead to a much bigger problem with younger and younger men struggling in the bedroom, struggling with erections. Yeah.
Yeah. On that note, I think it was on like a comedy show, but it was like a statistic came up, and it's funny, but it's also quite worrying. They were saying that like a high percentage of like teenagers, like 17, 18, 16, whatever, that age of boys, when they lost their virginity the first time they had sex, they finished by pulling out and coming on the girl's belly, because they thought that's what you're supposed to do because of all the porn they've been watching. And that's funny, but it's also not good.
Yeah, it's sad, because porn becomes sexual education for teenagers, because we don't have quality access to quality sex education. So all these teenagers who are naturally curious go online and watch porn, and they think this is real sex. Like, porn
Mm-hmm.
isn't real sex, and that's the issue. It's like looking at the, like an action movie and thinking this is real
Yeah.
life, and so trying to live that kind of life then, after watching the action movie. That's kind of similar thing to watching porn and going, oh, this is real sex, this is how I'm supposed to have sex. No, porn isn't sex education. Porn is entertainment. But when it's treated as sexual education, it's gonna cause issues and problems.
Yeah. And so like if kids, say like parents are listening to this, maybe if kids aren't getting that kind of like actual education, as they're growing up and they're getting that education from porn, like what can parents do? Like obviously, you said earlier about I don't know if it's your parents or people's parents having those kind of inhibitions around things, and that passes on to the kids. How can parents help their kids, without it feeling weird for them?
Well, first of all, developing a healthier relationship with their own sexuality. That's the first
Uh-huh.
thing, because when you are energetically okay with your body being sexual, then your kids being around you will feel that. But as soon as you start, like a sexy scene comes on the movie, and you get all weird and tense and and
Yeah.
constricted, then the kids kind of pick up on that, and they go, oh, something like really wrong with this sex thing.
So just to let everyone know what happened, my laptop decided to restart in the middle of the conversation. So we've had to try and start again. I'm not sure where it finished, but hopefully we'll be able to just blend it all together. As far as we know, what we wrapped up on, Helena was talking about when, if parents are watching TV with the kids and a sex scene comes on and, the parents tense up and get all weird, then the kids will pick up on that and take on those traits. So if you can remember where you were, like what your train of thought was from there, we'll go
Yeah.
from there. Yeah.
So the first step for the parents is to actually embrace their own sexuality as something natural and
Yeah.
and beautiful, and cultivate a healthier relationship with their own pleasure, their own bodies, so that they carry that sort of energy around their kids, so they don't get weirded out when a sex scene comes on TV, or when a child asks a sex related question. And
Yeah.
that's when it brings me to the second part, is actually educate your kids. And as soon as they start to ask questions, that's when they are ready to hear the answer. And don't be all, weird and fluffy about those sex questions or sex, topics. Like, tell them the truth. Tell them that it's okay to touch themselves. Obviously not in public. This is something that, maybe should be explored in the bedroom.
Yeah.
But that it is a beautiful thing. It is, our bodies can give us a lot of pleasure, and it's beautiful and natural and healthy to enjoy that pleasure. So giving kids that kind of information and pointing them towards a healthy sensual or sexual experience later on in their lives is going to be very helpful. It's going to kind of set the foundation for them to not be inhibited, not be repressed, but actually treat sex as a healthy and natural part of their lives.
Yeah. And you said when they ask the questions, they're ready to hear the answers. Would you say like if there's sort of like certain ages to give a different kind of answer, like still tell them, what's going on, but kind of use the different kinds of words and language depending on how old they are when they ask?
Yeah. Not some time ago, I was actually talking to a group of teenagers, and they were mainly 14-year-old boys.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually quite surprised with how much awareness they had around sex, and that I could talk about sex to them like the way I would to an adult. So I'd say as soon as they are, around, I guess past 10 years old, you can sort of test the waters and see how okay they
Yeah.
are. Like, what do they know the names of the body parts? And do
Mm-hmm.
they know what masturbation is? Do they know what intercourse is? Do they know, how babies are made, etc.? But talk to them in actual terms, using proper names for the body
Yeah.
parts and for the activities. Maybe like below that, when they toddlers, obviously this is more of a time to be more gentle about their sexual education, and more because they might just not be ready for the for the full-on topic of what sex is, but
Mm-hmm.
past the age of 10, I find that kids are probably ready to hear the actual story about
Yeah.
sex. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So I've only got a couple more things written down that I wanted, really to ask about. The last one really is what are some of the most common things, if we haven't covered them already, that people who come to see you tend to ask about? Maybe things they're struggling with or things they need to learn to improve their sex lives, whatever it might be.
So past the more directly sex-related questions like sex hurts or I can't come, etc., I guess the second biggest area is lost passion in relationships. So that's people who are in relationships or have been in kind of more committed long-term relationships, and they
Mm-hmm.
struggle with the frequency of sex or desire for sex or sexual frustrations because sex life kind of sort of tends to sometimes die, but very often just really reduce in relationships, and people really struggle because they don't know why it's happening. If sex is so amazing, why are we not having it, or why are we having it so infrequently, etc. So a big topic in my sessions is the whole maintaining passion and desire in relationships, how to work with lower libido, how to navigate our arousal, our desire for sex, the frustrations that come from not having enough sex, etc. So that's a huge area, very, very, very common for people to ask about that.
Yeah, and obviously it's probably a complex answer, but what are the typical things that would help in those scenarios? If it's a common question, people listening might be having the same issue. So if they're having that kind of issue of like loss of desire or whatever it might be, how do you get around that?
In fact, my first answer is it is actually really complicated because a lot of things affect our libido and our desire for sex. So in many cases, when people bring some kind of issue that on the surface looks like not a lot of sex or looks like sexual frustration, etc., I need to start digging deeper in order to understand what's actually underneath that, what's going on. But if you're not in a position right now to go and have sessions with a sex therapist or couples therapist and uncover all of that, the first thing is actually to start talking about your needs, your sexual needs. Because in many cases, people just don't realize how their partner is feeling, that they are experiencing this frustration, that maybe they're feeling rejected when they are the ones, like one person is always initiating sex and the other one is not very responsive to that. For example, there may be deep sense of rejection or resentment around the sexual connection. So actually to put that on the table and to say, look, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm experiencing. And to do that, it's important to do that not as an accusation, you're bad and you're making me feel bad and you're hurting me, but more as an expression of need. I desire you. I desire an intimate connection with you. I need for us to connect. Otherwise, I feel disconnected. I feel rejected. I feel grief. I feel anger. I feel frustration, etc., etc. That's a great way to start. That's a great point to start in the conversation of how can we get our needs met for both of us. Because if there's needs that are not being met in a relationship, that is gonna slowly start to erode not just the sex life, but the relationship itself.
Yeah.
So being aware of these needs and then even just negotiating, okay, how can we create that? What kind of sex life we both want and desire to have so that our needs for both people are met in this relationship. So communicating about it.
Yeah.
So important.
Okay, amazing. And so that's probably a really good point to transition into the last bit, which is something I've been thinking I want to ask guests every time somebody comes on. What if you could give one piece of advice, give people one thing to work on to, start improving their sex life, what would that be?
Definitely slow down. Slow down your sexual experience. There is so much more fun that we can have when we slow down, but we tend to treat sex as something that needs to happen in a rush, like we want to create a lot of sexual excitement quickly. And so it can lead to a man ejaculating pretty quickly. And it's like when the whole experience is sort of rushed because we have this perception that excitement needs to be very high and we need to kind of have this very prompt or highly passionate experience. Nothing wrong with passion, but when you rush through it too much, you're gonna miss out on a lot of the more beautiful, more subtle sensation and experiences that you can have during sex. It's like when we get into sex with that mindset that we're just gonna chase that orgasm because that's the main beat, and I say main beat in quotation marks because to me that's just one part of sex, and we sort of start to miss out on the richness and depth of the sexual erotic experience. So slowing down means that we can savor much more the pleasure, the connection, the intimacy of it. And I teach my clients a lot of different rituals and techniques and practices that help increase the depth of their sexual connection and pleasure. But the best, or like the main thing I would say, is slow down. Give yourself an hour to have a sexual experience, because when when everything is done within 10 minutes, it can feel a bit anticlimactic and it can leave people feeling a bit frustrated.
Yeah.
Whereas when you give yourself that time to fully go deep into your pleasure, to caress each other, kiss each other's bodies, have that unrestricted almost time to delight in your sexual and erotic and sensual pleasure and that beautiful connection that you can have, then that creates more pleasure, more sexual fulfillment and satisfaction, and definitely better orgasms.
Amazing. So we talked about loads of good stuff, loads of useful things there. Last thing there, obviously slowing down. We talked about communicating more with your partner, whatever's going on. We talked about challenging the ideas you've got. Are they helping me? And hopefully, people find it all useful. But if anybody wants to find out a bit more about any of that, or if they, want to, get in touch with you and maybe, hire you to help them out, where can people go to find you?
The best place is my website, helenanista.com. I have different resources there. I have my online courses that anybody all over the world can access. I also work with people one-on-one all over the world. I work through Zoom, which is like a Skype alternative. So that's available as well. I've published a book which answers a lot of questions that people ask about sex and about sexual issues and frustrations. And I'm also quite active on YouTube and social media, so I publish a lot of content that is available online, available for free, and also run workshops and events, but that's mainly in Australia. So if you're in Australia, that's very definitely available. But if you're anywhere else in the world, I have my online content, my blog, my social media, the articles, online courses, and you can work with me directly through Zoom.
Okay, great. Well, I'll put all the links to all of those things, your website, social media, and all that in the show notes for the podcast and in the description on the YouTube video and everything. But apart from that, it's been amazing. It's been an awesome chat. So thanks for coming on, Helena, for being on the show. And hopefully every single listener has better sex tonight after this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.